The strange thing about betrayal is that sometimes it sounds exactly like Christmas laughter. That was the thought running through my head the moment my wife handed me divorce papers beside a 7-foot Christmas tree, while her family started clapping like they'd been waiting years for the show. The house smelled like cinnamon candles, roasted ham, and expensive wine. Bing Crosby hummed softly through hidden speakers while snow drifted outside the tall windows of her parents' house in Aspen Ridge Estates, one of those gated suburbs north of Chicago where every driveway looked like a luxury car commercial. Amanda stood across from me in a red silk dress, one hand holding a champagne glass, the other holding the envelope that would split 14 years of marriage in half. Her mother, Diane Bennett, actually smiled before Amanda even opened her mouth. That should have warned me. Richard Bennett leaned back in his leather dining chair with the relaxed expression of a man watching a football game he already knew the score to. Around the table sat Amanda's brother Kyle and his wife Melissa, both grinning like kids waiting for fireworks. I remember staring at the lights on the Christmas tree because they looked softer than the faces around me. "Michael," Amanda said calmly, almost casually, "I think we both know this marriage has been dead for years." Then she slid the envelope across the dining table. The sound it made against polished oak felt louder than the Christmas music. Nobody looked shocked. Nobody asked questions. That was the moment I realized this wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Carefully. Quietly. Probably discussed over family dinners long before tonight. I looked down at the envelope with my name written in Amanda's neat handwriting. Michael Carter. 14 years reduced to black ink and legal paper. Then her brother laughed under his breath and muttered, "About damn time." The room erupted in small chuckles after that, nervous at first, then bolder once they saw Amanda smiling too. Richard lifted his bourbon glass. "To new beginnings," he said. And just like that, they started cheering. Actual cheering. I sat there in silence while the family eyed. Spent over a decade paying vacations for celebrated the destruction of my marriage 2 days before Christmas. Amanda took a slow sip of champagne and crossed her legs like this was some corporate negotiation she'd already won. "You're a good man, Michael," she said, using the same tone people use when firing an employee they never respected. "But honestly, I'm tired of pretending this life is enough." Enough. Funny word. I built that life from a rented garage with one delivery truck and a broken heater that barely survived Illinois winters. I spent years waking up at 4:30 in the morning while Amanda slept under Egyptian cotton sheets I paid for. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, weekends, because I believed sacrifice meant something. Because I believed stability was love. But sitting there beneath gold Christmas lights while her family toasted my failure, I realized something dangerous. Quiet men get mistaken for weak men all the time. Amanda looked relieved, almost radiant, like she'd finally escaped embarrassment. "The lawyers already worked everything out," she continued. "I'll stay in the Hinsdale house until spring." Her mother nodded proudly while Kyle smirked into his whiskey glass. They thought they understood my life because I drove a 3-year-old Ford F-150 instead of a Ferrari. Because I wore the same old navy pea coat every winter. Because I never talked about money at dinner parties. Amanda leaned forward slightly and gave me a pity smile that somehow hurt worse than the papers themselves. "I just can't spend another Christmas pretending you're someone you're not." The room fell quiet after that. Outside, snow kept falling softly across the neighborhood. Inside, her family waited for me to break apart in front of them. But I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even touch the divorce papers. I simply reached for my bourbon, took one slow sip, and finally looked directly at my wife. Because in that moment, while her family celebrated what they thought was my ending, I realized none of them had the slightest idea who they were humiliating. I held Amanda's gaze for 3 long seconds while the room waited for me to collapse. That was what they wanted. Tears. Begging. Anger loud enough to justify the story they had already written about me. Instead, I set my bourbon glass down carefully beside my untouched dinner plate and leaned back in my chair. The Christmas lights reflected off the crystal chandelier above us, warm gold against cold faces. "If that is what you want," I said quietly, "then I will not stop you." The silence afterward felt strange, almost disappointing. Kyle stopped smirking for a second like he had expected more entertainment. Amanda blinked once, caught off guard by how calm I sounded. People expect quiet men to eventually explode. They never know what to do when the silence stays controlled. Richard cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Probably for the best," he said, folding his hands across the table. "You two were never exactly a match." Amanda nodded slowly beside him, gaining confidence again now that her father had stepped in. "Michael never understood ambition," she added. "He was comfortable staying average." Average. That word settled into my chest heavier than the divorce papers. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed something ugly. Amanda truly believed it. Somewhere along the way, the woman who used to eat takeout pizza with me on the floor of our first apartment had started measuring human worth by appearances. Luxury watches, country club memberships, dinner reservations impossible to get. I looked around the room at the people judging my life while wearing clothes and jewelry purchased with money they assumed came from nowhere. Diane adjusted the diamond bracelet I bought her after Richard's bypass surgery 3 years ago. Kyle swirled 20-year bourbon from a bottle I sent him after his promotion fell through. Melissa sat beneath a painting Amanda once cried over because she thought we could never afford original art. Funny how generosity becomes invisible once people decide you are beneath them. Amanda reached for her champagne again, her nails tapping lightly against the stem of the glass. "The attorneys already agreed on preliminary numbers," she said. "The Hinsdale property, the lake house, and temporary support until everything is finalized." There it was. The real conversation hiding underneath Christmas wrapping paper and fake sympathy. Assets. Numbers. Ownership. Her family stayed quiet now, listening carefully. Even Kyle stopped drinking. I could almost hear them mentally spending money they thought was already theirs. Amanda mistook my silence for surrender. "Honestly, Michael," she continued softly, "you should be relieved too. We both know this marriage has been over for a long time." I almost smiled at that, because in one way, she was finally telling the truth. The marriage ended months ago, maybe years. It ended slowly, the way winter kills trees. Quietly, one cold day at a time. It ended when Amanda stopped asking how my day went and only asked when I would finally upgrade the house in Naples. It ended when she started introducing me at parties as my husband, Michael, with the same energy people use introducing accountants. It ended when I caught her deleting banking notifications from my office desk 6 months earlier while pretending to look for a pen. Back then I said nothing. Quiet men notice everything. That is our curse. Amanda pushed the papers closer toward me. "You can review everything after the holidays," she said. "I just wanted us to handle this like adults." Adults. Another interesting word. I glanced toward the massive bay windows overlooking the snowy backyard. Beyond the glass sat the black Mercedes SUV I bought Amanda last Christmas after she said her old one looked cheap beside her friends' vehicles. Snow covered the windshield now in a thin white layer. Funny how fast expensive things become ordinary to people who never earned them. Richard lifted his bourbon again. "Well," he announced proudly, "sometimes life forces people to move on." The family nodded in agreement. Amanda finally relaxed fully into her chair, convinced the night belonged to her. But as I looked around that glowing dining room filled with expensive decorations and artificial warmth, one thought kept repeating in my mind. None of them understood the difference between appearing wealthy and actually controlling wealth. And that misunderstanding was about to become very expensive for all of them. I saw nothing that night. That seemed to bother Amanda more than if I had argued. I could see it in the way her fingers tightened around the champagne glass after I calmly slid the envelope back across the table untouched. "You should probably read it," she said carefully. "There is no rush," I replied. "A marriage that lasted 14 years can survive another 48 hours. Kyle laughed again, louder this time. "Man, you still talk like a middle manager giving performance reviews." Diane shook her head with that disappointed expression mothers reserve for men they think failed their daughters. "Amanda always needed someone stronger," she sighed softly, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Stronger. Funny thing about strength. Most people only recognize it when it arrives wearing a tailored suit and driving a $100,000 car. They never notice the man waking up before sunrise for 15 years straight, building something brick by brick while everyone else sleeps. I stood slowly from the dining table and adjusted the cuff of my charcoal sweater. Nobody moved. The Christmas lights shimmered softly against the windows while snow continued falling outside, quiet and steady across the backyard. Amanda watched me carefully now. Not nervous exactly, just uncertain. She had prepared herself for anger, maybe even begging. But calm unsettles people when they are expecting chaos. You are leaving? She asked. For tonight, I answered. I think your family deserves time to celebrate. That landed harder than shouting ever could have. Richard's smile faded slightly after that. Amanda crossed her arms defensively. Do not turn this into some martyr act, Michael. I almost laughed. If she only knew how long I stopped trying to play the victim. Victims wait for rescue. Men like me learn to build exits instead. I grabbed my coat from the rack near the foyer while Christmas music drifted softly through the house. There was an old framed photo beside the staircase from our first Christmas together. Amanda in a knitted white sweater. Me holding a cheap artificial tree we bought at Target because we could not afford a real one back then. We looked exhausted and happy. The kind of happy that comes from building a life instead of performing one. Amanda noticed me staring at the picture. People change, she said quietly from behind me. I slipped my coat on slowly. Yes, I answered. They do. Then I stepped outside into the freezing Illinois night before she could respond. The cold air hit my face sharp as broken glass. Snowflakes drifted beneath golden driveway lights, while laughter still echoed faintly behind me inside the Bennett house. I stood there for a moment beside my black Ford truck listening to the muffled celebration continuing through the walls. 14 years together, and they were already toasting my replacement before the divorce papers were even signed. That told me everything. I climbed into the truck and shut the door gently. Silence wrapped around me instantly except for the low hum of the heater warming up. My phone buzzed against the center console. A text from Amanda. Please do not make this uglier than it needs to be. I stared at the message for several seconds before setting the phone face down without replying. Ugly. Another interesting word. She thought ugly was paperwork and uncomfortable conversations. She had no idea what ugly looked like once lawyers started uncovering realities instead of appearances. I pulled slowly out of the Bennett driveway while giant glowing wreaths and Christmas decorations blurred through the falling snow. Houses lined the streets like postcards. Perfect lawns. Luxury SUVs. Warm windows glowing behind expensive curtains. The entire neighborhood looked peaceful. But peace is fragile when it is financed by assumptions. Amanda believed she understood our marriage because she understood spending. Her family believed they understood my life because they understood the version of me I allowed them to see. None of them knew about Blackridge Holdings. None of them knew why my name disappeared from ownership records 3 years earlier. And none of them knew that while they were celebrating inside that dining room tonight, I was already mentally calculating exactly how long it would take for their victory to collapse. The roads were almost empty by the time I reached downtown Chicago. Snow drifted across the pavement in soft white waves while old Christmas songs crackled through the truck radio like ghosts from another life. Every storefront glowed red and gold. Families hurried through the cold carrying shopping bags and wrapped presents, bundled beneath scarves and wool coats. The whole city looked warm from a distance. But loneliness has a way of making even beautiful things feel hollow. I loosened my grip on the steering wheel and exhaled slowly as the skyline rose ahead of me against the dark winter sky. Amanda used to love driving into the city during Christmas week. She would point at decorated windows like a little girl, talking about penthouse apartments and rooftop parties we would someday attend. Back then I thought ambition was harmless. I did not realize some people eventually stop appreciating what they already have because they become addicted to what other people might envy. The truck heater hummed softly while memories kept replaying in my head like scenes from an old film. Amanda sitting beside me in our first apartment eating takeout Chinese food on Christmas Eve because we could not afford gifts that year. Amanda crying when I handed her the keys to her first Mercedes after Blackridge landed its first major distribution contract. Amanda standing beside me at charity galas smiling proudly before she slowly started introducing me less as her husband and more like an accessory that no longer matched the lifestyle she wanted. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. The sudden obsession with social circles. The comments about my truck. The passive little jokes at dinner parties about how I worked too much to enjoy success. Wealth changes people differently depending on how they earned it. Men who build something respect stability because they know how fragile it is. People who inherit comfort usually mistake it for permanence. I turned off Lakeshore Drive and headed toward the old warehouse district near Fulton Market. Most of the buildings there had been renovated into luxury offices and expensive restaurants now, but one corner property still belonged to me. Or at least that was what the public records suggested. The black iron gate rolled open automatically as my headlights swept across the pavement. Snow dusted the edges of the loading dock, while warm amber light glowed faintly through second-floor windows. I parked slowly and sat there for a moment staring at the building. 15 years earlier, this place smelled like diesel fuel, wet cardboard, and burnt coffee. I used to sleep on a folding cot in the upstairs office during the early years when contracts were unstable and payroll mattered more than comfort. Back then, Amanda believed in me completely. She would bring sandwiches at midnight and sit beside me while I balanced invoices with exhausted hands. We used to dream together here. That is the dangerous part about memory. It reminds you that people are not born cruel. Sometimes they drift their one compromise at a time. I stepped out of the truck and cold air sliced through my coat immediately. My boots echoed against the concrete floor as I walked inside the warehouse. Everything was quiet except for the distant hum of industrial refrigeration units downstairs. The upstairs office still looked exactly the same. Walnut desk, leather chairs, framed photographs from the early Blackridge days hanging along the wall. One picture stopped me cold. Amanda and me standing beside the company's first delivery truck in the freezing rain, both smiling like we had conquered the world. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then my eyes shifted toward the dark steel safe built into the wall behind the bookshelf. Most people think power announces itself loudly. Real power usually sits silent behind locked doors while everyone else argues over appearances. I loosened my tie slowly and walked toward the safe while Christmas snow continued falling outside the warehouse windows. Because somewhere back in Hinsdale tonight, Amanda and her family were probably still celebrating. And they still had no idea the version of my life they thought they were divorcing had stopped existing years ago. I stood in front of the safe for almost a full minute before entering the code. Not because I forgot it. Some things become muscle memory after enough years. No, I hesitated. Because I knew the second that steel door opened, the marriage Amanda thought she understood would officially become a legal illusion. The keypad beeped softly beneath my fingers. Then the lock clicked. Heavy, mechanical, final. Inside sat rows of neatly organized binders, sealed envelopes, and black document boxes stacked with the kind of quiet precision that only comes from years of planning for storms nobody else sees coming. I reached for the top folder labeled Blackridge Holdings Trust Structure and carried it to the walnut desk beneath the dim office lamp. Outside the warehouse windows, snow continued drifting through the city in slow white waves, while somewhere miles away Amanda's family probably slept peacefully, believing they had already won. That almost made me smile. People confuse visibility with ownership all the time. They see a house, a company logo, a title on LinkedIn, and assume they understand who controls the machine. But real wealth hides itself. Real wealth survives. 3 years earlier, after watching two business partners lose everything during ugly divorces and lawsuits, I quietly restructured my entire empire under layered holding companies and irrevocable trusts. Not because I planned to leave Amanda, because I understood something most men learn too late. Love and legal protection are not the same thing. I opened the first binder slowly. Ownership charts, trust agreements, asset schedules, distribution rights. Blackridge Logistics no longer belonged to Michael Carter, the individual. It belonged to a protected structure managed through Delaware entities and generational trust frameworks designed specifically to survive emotional disasters. The Hinsdale house Amanda planned to keep, held under a residential trust tied to operational performance metrics she had never heard of. The lake house in Wisconsin? Same structure. Even the luxury accounts she used for shopping allowances flowed through discretionary distributions controlled by board authorization. And there was the detail that mattered most. Amanda never bothered asking deeper questions because she assumed the man driving a Ford truck could not possibly understand high-level financial architecture. I leaned back in the leather chair and rubbed a hand across my face slowly. The exhaustion finally started settling into my bones. Not rage, not heartbreak exactly, just a heavy disappointment that felt older than the snow outside. There is something uniquely painful about realizing the person who shared your bed for 14 years only understood the edited version of your life. My phone buzzed again across the desk. Amanda. I let it ring twice before answering. Michael, she said carefully, her voice softer now. The confidence from dinner had faded a little. In the background, I could still hear faint Christmas music and distant conversation. "Where are you?" "Working," I answered truthfully. Silence lingered for a second. "You really left without saying goodbye." I stared at the trust documents spread across the desk beneath my hands. "Your family seemed busy celebrating." Another pause, then a quiet sigh. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." There was that phrase again. Harder. As if consequences were inconveniences instead of realities. "Amanda," I said calmly, "did you ever once ask yourself why I stopped putting assets directly in my name?" The line went quiet instantly. I could almost hear her thinking. "What does that mean?" she asked carefully now. I glanced toward the safe still sitting open behind me. "It means appearances can be misleading. Michael, do not start speaking in riddles." "I am not," I replied. "I am just surprised your attorneys did not explain how little you actually understand about our finances." The silence after that felt different. Colder. Amanda's breathing shifted slightly over the phone. For the first time all night, uncertainty entered her voice. "What exactly are you saying?" I stood slowly from the desk and walked toward the warehouse windows overlooking the frozen city streets below. Snow covered everything in soft white silence while Chicago glowed gold against the dark horizon. "I am saying," I answered quietly, "that tonight your family celebrated a version of reality that stopped existing years ago." Then I ended the call before she could respond. Amanda called 3 more times. After that, I did not answer any of them. By 2 in the morning, the city had gone almost completely silent beneath the snow, and the warehouse office smelled faintly of old paper, leather, and black coffee from the machine downstairs. I loosened my tie completely and sat alone beneath the dim office light, reviewing documents while the reality of the night settled deeper into my chest. There is a strange loneliness that comes when someone you loved finally reveals how little they truly understood about you. Amanda thought I spent 14 years building a transportation company. What I actually built was protection, layer after layer, quietly, patiently, because men who grow up with nothing learn early that security matters more than appearances. My father lost everything during the recession back in 2008. Construction business, retirement savings, our family home in Joliet. I still remember watching him sit at our kitchen table, staring at unopened bills with eyes that looked 20 years older overnight. He used to tell me something I never forgot. If your survival depends on what other people think you own, then you do not own anything at all. That sentence changed the way I built my entire life. Blackridge Logistics became successful faster than anyone expected. Warehouses, regional contracts, medical supply chains. By 40, I had more money than I ever imagined as a kid sleeping beside a broken radiator in a blue-collar Illinois neighborhood. But wealth attracts attention. Attention attracts risk. So while Amanda focused on country clubs and luxury vacations, I focused on legal architecture. The first restructuring happened quietly after our 10th anniversary. I moved operational ownership into holding entities managed through protected trusts. Publicly, nothing changed. Same office, same company branding, same Michael Carter driving an ordinary truck. But legally, the empire Amanda thought she was divorcing no longer belonged to a husband vulnerable to emotional decisions. It belonged to systems designed specifically to survive them. Around 3:15 in the morning, my office line rang. Not my cell phone. The private office number almost. Nobody used anymore. I stared at it for a second before answering. "You are awake late on Christmas Eve," the voice said calmly. "Daniel Mercer. My attorney. My oldest friend besides Amanda." "Looks like you already heard," I replied. "Amanda called my office an hour ago," he said. Sounded very confident. I almost smiled at that. Daniel had spent 20 years cleaning up disasters created by overconfident people. "And now?" I asked quietly. Papers shifted on his end of the line. "Now she sounds nervous." Snow tapped softly against the warehouse windows while I leaned back in the chair staring at the ceiling. "I never wanted this to become a war, Daniel." "I know," he answered. "That is why you prepared for one before it started." Silence settled between us after that. The kind old friends do not need to fill. Finally, he cleared his throat softly. "There is one thing you should know. Amanda's attorneys requested preliminary asset disclosures yesterday morning. Yesterday morning. Before the Christmas dinner. Before the applause. Before the performance." My jaw tightened slightly for the first time all night. "So this was already planned before tonight?" "Very planned," Daniel replied carefully. "And based on the filing language, they assumed direct ownership structures were still active." There it was. The fatal mistake. They built an entire strategy around a version of my finances that had not existed in years. I stood slowly and walked toward the dark warehouse floor below the office windows. Forklifts sat motionless beneath hanging industrial lights while snow drifted outside beyond the loading docks. Everything looked frozen, waiting. What happens when they realize? I asked quietly. Daniel let out a long breath on the other end. Panic, he said bluntly. Because once the discretionary trusts activate under divorce review, Amanda loses access to almost everything immediately. I closed my eyes for a second after hearing that. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just sadness. Deep, exhausting sadness. Because despite everything, part of me still remembered the woman who once sat beside me eating takeout pizza on a warehouse floor, believing in dreams bigger than both of us. Daniel's voice softened slightly. Michael, are you sure you want to proceed this way? I stared out across the sleeping city while Christmas snow buried the streets in white silence. No, I admitted honestly. But she already decided this marriage was a transaction. Then I looked back toward the safe still standing open behind my desk. And transactions have consequences. The first crack appeared 40 hours after Christmas dinner. I was standing in the warehouse kitchen pouring burnt coffee into a paper cup when my phone lit up with 6 missed calls from Amanda back to back. Not texts this time. Calls. Urgent ones. I let the screen glow for a few seconds before answering calmly. Michael, she said immediately, her voice tight and uneven. Why are my cards getting declined? There it was. Panic always arrives quietly at first. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just confusion creeping into someone's voice when reality stops matching expectation. I took a slow sip of coffee while morning light spilled across the warehouse windows in pale gray streaks. Which cards? I asked. Do not do this right now, she snapped softly. I am at Neiman Marcus and none of the accounts are working. In the background, I could hear muffled store music and the nervous voice of an employee trying to sound polite. Amanda lowered her voice instantly after that, embarrassed. I tried all 3 cards. That is strange, I replied evenly. You should probably contact the trust administrators. Silence. Sharp and immediate. The what? I stared across the warehouse floor where workers were already beginning morning operations downstairs. Forklifts beeped softly in the distance while fresh snow clung to the loading docks outside. Normal life continuing while someone else's illusion collapsed. The discretionary trust administrators, I repeated calmly. The spending accounts are not directly tied to me personally. Amanda stopped breathing for half a second. I could hear it. Michael, what exactly did you do? There is something surreal about hearing fear slowly replace superiority in someone's voice. 2 nights earlier, she stood beneath Christmas lights, treating me like an outdated inconvenience. Now she sounded like someone realizing the floor beneath her feet was never solid. I did not do anything, I answered truthfully. The review process activates automatically during divorce proceedings. Another long silence. Then quieter now. My attorney never mentioned trusts. Then your attorney made assumptions. I heard her exhale sharply. Somewhere behind her, a cashier awkwardly asked if she needed another moment. Amanda ignored them completely. The Hinsdale House access code stopped working this morning too, she whispered. Security said ownership authorization changed. I closed my eyes briefly after hearing that. Not satisfaction, just inevitability. Systems do not care about emotions. That is why I built them. Temporary restrictions, I explained calmly. Standard asset protection protocol. Michael, this is insane. No, I replied softly. What was insane was serving divorce papers at Christmas dinner while your family applauded. Silence swallowed the line after that. Deep silence this time. The kind where truth finally enters the room. You planned this, she said eventually. I almost laughed at the irony. Amanda, I spent years protecting what I built. You just never noticed because you thought quiet meant weak. Her breathing became uneven again. My mother is furious. Your mother seemed very confident 2 nights ago. That landed exactly where I intended it to. Cold truth cuts deeper than shouting ever could. Kyle said you were hiding money. I stared down into my coffee cup while steam curled upward through the quiet office. No, I answered. I protected it. The difference matters. Outside the warehouse windows, snowplows crawled through the streets, clearing away the storm from Christmas night. Chicago looked washed clean beneath pale winter sunlight. Amanda spoke again finally, but the arrogance was gone now. What happens next? I leaned against the office counter and watched workers moving below through the warehouse floor. Men loading trucks, scanning shipments, building things, real things. The kind of people nobody notices at luxury dinner parties until deliveries stop arriving. That depends, I said, quietly. Are you finally ready to understand the life you thought you were divorcing? She did not answer immediately, and for the first time since this entire nightmare started, I realized Amanda was no longer speaking to me like a disappointed wife. She was speaking to me like someone standing outside a locked door, suddenly realizing she never had the key. 3 days after Christmas, Amanda showed up at Blackridge headquarters for the first time in nearly 4 years. Not the warehouse office where I spent most of my time. The real headquarters downtown. 42 floors of steel and dark glass overlooking the Chicago River. Hidden behind a corporate name she had probably passed 100 times without recognizing. I was standing inside the executive conference room reviewing shipping projections when my assistant Lauren stepped quietly inside. "Your wife is here," she said carefully. Funny how that word sounded different now. Wife. Not partner. Not teammate. Just someone connected to me legally while standing emotionally miles away. I closed the file in front of me slowly. "How upset?" I asked. Lauren hesitated slightly. "She looks more confused than angry." That made sense. Anger comes from feeling challenged. Confusion comes from realizing your understanding of reality was incomplete. I nodded once and walked toward the lobby elevators while the city stretched gray and frozen beyond floor to ceiling windows. The entire building carried the quiet confidence of old money and serious business. Marble floors, soft lighting, security staff in tailored suits. The kind of place Amanda always claimed successful men belonged in. Ironically, she never realized she had already been married to one. The elevator doors opened into the main lobby, and there she stood beside the reception desk wearing a cream wool coat and oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather outside. Amanda looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had not slept properly since Christmas night. Her eyes locked onto mine instantly, and for the first time in years I saw uncertainty there instead of judgment. She glanced around the lobby slowly. "This is yours?" she asked. Quietly. Before I could answer, the receptionist stood immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Then the security manager near the elevators nodded respectfully. "Sir." I watched Amanda absorb each detail one at a time. The recognition, the deference, the quiet authority. Her entire expression shifted slowly as reality rearranged itself inside her head. "You told me you worked out of the warehouse," she whispered. "I do," I answered calmly. "Sometimes." We stood there awkwardly beneath the massive Blackridge Global Logistics logo mounted behind the reception desk. Amanda stared at it like she had never truly seen it before. Maybe she had not. Most people only notice what confirms the story they already believe. "Your assistant called you founder upstairs," she said carefully. "I thought you were regional operations." I almost smiled at that. That is what I let most people think. Her face tightened slightly. "Why would you hide this from me?" The question almost offended me with its simplicity. "I did not hide anything, Amanda. You stopped asking about my world years ago." Silence settled between us while office employees crossed the lobby carrying coffee and briefcases. Nobody paid much attention to us. Powerful places teach people discretion. Amanda removed her sunglasses slowly, revealing tired eyes underneath. "My attorney said the trust structures are nearly impossible to challenge." "They are not impossible," I replied. "Just expensive and unlikely to succeed." She looked away toward the river outside the glass windows. Snow drifted softly beyond the skyline, while boats sat frozen along the docks below. "Kyle thinks you manipulated everything." Kyle also thought applauding our divorce at Christmas dinner was classy. That hit harder than I intended. Amanda lowered her eyes immediately after that. Shame finally entering places arrogance used to live. "My mother lost access to the Hinsdale guest account yesterday," she said softly. She called me crying. I stared at her for several seconds before answering. "Amanda, your family spent years mistaking generosity for weakness." Her eyes filled slightly after hearing that, though she blinked the emotion. Back quickly. "I never knew," she admitted quietly. "No," I answered. "You knew exactly the version of me you chose to see." The lobby fell silent around us for a moment except for the faint sound of piano music drifting through hidden speakers overhead. Amanda looked smaller standing there now. Less polished, less certain. Just a woman realizing she had spent years chasing status, while overlooking the man quietly building the very life she claimed was not enough. Finally, she looked back at me and asked the question I think had been haunting her since Christmas night. Michael, who are you really? I held her gaze calmly beneath the soft lobby lights while snow continued falling over Chicago outside. Then I gave her the only honest answer left. I am the same man you married. You just stopped respecting him before you ever bothered understanding him. By the middle of January, the divorce stopped feeling like a public spectacle and started becoming what it should have been from the beginning. Quiet paperwork, controlled conversations, reality replacing performance. Amanda moved into a luxury apartment downtown temporarily paid through one of her remaining personal accounts. Though I heard from Daniel that her attorneys had become dramatically less aggressive after discovering how deeply protected the trust structures actually were. Funny how confidence changes once assumptions disappear. The Bennett family went strangely silent after New Year's. No more smug comments. No more celebratory messages passed through mutual friends. Kyle even tried calling me once around midnight after apparently learning the vacation property he planned to use for summer boating trips was never legally ours in the first place. I let the call go to voicemail. Some conversations arrived too late to matter. Chicago settled deeper into winter as January stretched on. Gray mornings, salted sidewalks, steam rising from subway grates beneath pale skies. I spent most days at the warehouse again, exactly where I always felt most grounded. There is comfort in honest work. Pallets moving, trucks arriving before dawn, men joking over burnt coffee at 6 in the morning. The world keeps moving no matter how badly personal lives fall apart. One Friday evening, nearly a month after Christmas, I stayed late reviewing quarterly numbers while snow drifted softly outside the loading docks. The warehouse was almost empty except for the low hum of refrigeration systems downstairs. My office phone rang around 8:30. Amanda. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hey, she said softly. Not cold anymore. Not arrogant. Just tired. Hey. Silence lingered between us for several seconds. The kind shared by people who once knew each other completely and now barely recognized the distance between them. I drove past our first apartment today, she said quietly. The little one near Cicero Avenue. I leaned back slowly in the leather chair. I had not thought about that place in years. Tiny kitchen, broken heater, thin walls that rattled every time trains passed nearby. They painted the building blue, she continued softly. It used to be green. I smiled faintly despite myself. You hated that green. I know. Her voice cracked slightly after that. Michael, when did we become people who could do this to each other? That question stayed in the air longer than either of us wanted. Because the truth is marriages rarely collapse in one dramatic moment. They erode quietly through small dismissals and growing contempt until eventually two strangers are standing inside the ruins pretending they still remember the blueprint. I do not think this happened overnight, I answered honestly. I think we stopped protecting each other a long time ago. Snow tapped gently against the office windows while silence settled again between us. Then Amanda spoke so quietly I almost missed it. My father said you would break eventually. I looked out across the dark warehouse floor below me. Forklifts parked in neat rows. Industrial lights glowing softly over empty concrete. Your father mistakes calm for weakness, I replied. A lot of people do. She let out a small laugh through tears after hearing that. Not mocking this time. Sad. Human. Real. I used to be proud of you, she admitted softly. Back when everything was simple. I closed my eyes briefly after hearing that because some wounds hurt specifically because they contain truth. Things were never simple, Amanda, I answered. We were just younger. Another long silence passed before she finally whispered, I am sorry. Not for the money. Not for the trusts. Not for losing access to luxury. Sorry for something deeper. Maybe for the applause. Maybe for forgetting who I was before the world became louder around us. I stared out across the snowy Chicago skyline, glowing faint gold against the winter night, and realized something surprising. I was no longer angry.